Hello yogis. So Chaturanga is a pose that if you're doing vinyasa, we do practically in every class, multiple times. So what do you do if it hurts your wrists? In this video, we're going to look at some tips and tricks to keep your wrists safe and happy. The first thing we want to do when we're looking at Chaturanga and going like, hey, why does this hurt? Is to first assess your range of motion. So, you take a look at your hand, you fold your hand back and you go, can I get that to 90 degrees or am I kind of like here, right? So we want to find out, is there something restricting in my wrist that doesn't let them move totally to flat? Because that is some of us. One of my friends has an extra bone in her wrist and she can't flex her hand all the way. So understanding if you have a normal structural impediment to bringing your wrist all the way to 90 degrees can be useful. Now, I am going to show you some tricks and adaptations to do Chaturanga a little bit more easily, but I'll tell you what, one of the most obvious things that happens with the wrist is that we're not using the actions of the hand. So what happens is that naturally we fall into the path of least resistance. And what that means is that when I put my weight on my hands, all of this weight goes into the base of my wrist, right? I don't use the rest of my hand to help defer that weight. So it's a little bit like this is the only place that I'm putting weight, right? And the rest of my hand really isn't working for me. Well, if I don't have the weight of my upper body distributed through my whole hand, yeah, that's a lot of pressure in one place. So before we go into a lot of adaptations, we first need to take a really good look and assess, hey, am I using my hands and the muscles of my hands and the muscles of my arms and my upper body to support this to best effect? Or am I falling into a path of least resistance in my hands and my wrists? And we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at that now. Okay, everyone, so here we are looking at our hands in Chaturanga. Now, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we are positioning our hands correctly. So a really good way to position your hand is with the center of your wrist in alignment with the outside of the shoulder, right? So we want our hands to be wide enough so that we have support. If they're a little closer or a little too far, we're not optimally aligning our bones. So first, let's check that out. Then we want to look at how are we positioning our hands? Am I turning them in? Am I turning them out? What's going on? So for most of us, not everyone, but for most of us, we want to align the center of the wrist with the space between the index finger and the middle finger. That's for most of us, because that helps to keep the wrist from either turning in or turning out. Keeps it nicely aligned. This is a really strong line through the center of the hand. But what I will say is if you have trouble anchoring through this point, this knuckle right here, you might turn your hands out a little bit more. So lining up the center of your wrist to the index finger can also be okay. That helps us to get the upper arms really working. Now, what tends to happen when we put our hands down is that we put all the weight in the base of the wrist, in these carpal bones. Well, that's not great. What we want to do instead is get the weight more into the front of the hand so we can distribute all of that weight across this greater surface area and de-weight the wrist. See, we have a nerve here called the median nerve, which runs right through the center. My carpal tunnel people will know exactly what that means. And we also have the ulnar nerve, which runs along the outside of the hand. Now, if I'm just flopping my hands down, can you see this part of the hand naturally wants to get light? So I'm putting all of that weight into this ulnar nerve. So if you've ever gotten numb through the outside of your hand, which totally happened to me, that's the ulnar nerve getting compressed, which basically means that we need to do the opposite. Rather than letting the weight fall to this point, path of least resistance, I need to actively push the weight forward and down into this point, the index knuckle, so that I can, the point is to get the weight evenly distributed through the whole of your palm. This is one of my favorite tricks to do to practice getting the weight more into the front of the hand. And all it is lifting the heel of the hand up. So first, this is a really great exercise to do for wrist support, to lift the heel of your hand up and then slowly, you're not going to drop it down, but slowly lower it down. Now I'm going to try to keep my shoulders right over my wrists. Lift the heels of your hands up, slowly squeeze the arms in, slowly lower it down. Lift the heels of your hands up, and you can feel you're getting a lot more weight into your fingers and the front of your hands. Squeeze those arms in, slowly lower down. Now already you feel like, wow, when the hands are down, all of a sudden they're really engaged. Weight is through the whole front of your fingers, right? So this can be a really good trick to do. At the beginning of class, when everyone's doing cat-cow, I like to do this a couple of times just to remind my hands that I need to get the weight into my finger pads and into my knuckles. And when I bring my heel and my hand down, it's a lot harder, but the weight is now distributed across the whole of my hand. Then in downward facing dog, again, hello, you can do that here and lift the heel of your hand up. Squeeze the arms in and play with downward facing dog here. When you lower the heel of your hand down, do it slowly and with control so that you can keep the weight distributed through the whole of your palm. Now, if you work on just those experiments, like lifting the heel of your hand up in cat-cow and down dog, doing those lifts, you're going to notice a big difference in your practice. On its own accord, that weight and that overpressure in the base of your wrists might actually take care of itself. So I want you to focus on really being keen in your alignment. Chaturanga is one of those places that when we lower down, people lose their alignment in their hands. The inner hands peel up. So why don't you practice this? You can do it on your knees. You don't have to get all crazy, right? But from here, squeeze the arms in, lots of support. As you come into Chaturanga, like with little hawk eyes, I want you to look at the base of your index knuckle. Does it tend to get light? Do the hands get light? Or can you keep that weight pushing forward down through your fingertips? Now, another thing I want to talk about here that's super important is that you connect the hands to the shoulders, right? To the shoulder girdle and then into your core. When we do Chaturanga, I'm not suspending myself through my wrists or through my arms. All of this becomes an integrated piece together, which helps to support my body. So one way to do this is what I lovingly call the pickle jars. So I want you to imagine you got a pickle jar and you're turning it, right? You got that cap and you're turning it. So your hands are turning out. This is the feeling of squeezing the upper arms in. So I'm turning the hands out. That helps to get the weight more into the index knuckle, and it also recruits all of these big muscles in my back to help support the pose. So this is a really fun thing to try. You come onto your hands into your knees, right? Pickle jar your hands, bend your elbows, screw the inner edges of your hands into the floor and turn your hands out, and notice how much support that gave you. I also want you to notice what's going on in your shoulder girdle. Are you collapsing? Are you spreading your shoulders super wide like a cat? So we want to find this lift in the armpits as you squeeze the shoulder blades down so that there's so much anchoring and support from the underside of the armpit down into the hand. That keeps the weight from collapsing into your palms and instead starts to recruit the rest of your body to support you. So we have our hands, we're screwing our hands into the floor. Keep screwing the hands down into the floor as you lower down and then press back up. It's going to be a completely different experience. So before we go into any Chaturanga adaptations, this is your homework. I want you to try those heel lifts and get the weight into the fingers. Use hawk eyes to make sure that you are really focusing on your index knuckle, and find your pickle jars, right? If you need to do this from your knees, do it from your knees. It's actually not that much easier, but do it from your knees until you can really ensure that your hands have become super, super mindful, and see if that helps to take any discomfort or pressure out of your wrists. But what if your wrists still hurt? What do you do? Well, now it's time to look at how we're doing Chaturanga. Okay, so the old school way of doing Chaturanga involved a lot of shifting forward. So this is what we would do. You'd hear, teachers say, okay, shift forward and lower down. And so my wrist would be at this angle. Can you see? It's like, if I'm just showing you seated, it's like this. That's a lot of flexion on this wrist, right? We did that little experiment at the beginning. That's a lot of flexion. Instead, what you could do is, instead of lowering here, which makes my wrist super flexed, you can instead lower here. Notice that's quite a different angle, right? I don't have to have them so flexed as down here. The lower my hands are by my waist, the more my wrist is flexed. The more my hands are closer to, say, the bra line or the chest, right? The less my wrist has to flex. So if it's hard for your wrist to bend all the way, as it is for many of us, this is a simple solution. And the way you do it is you just don't shift forward as much when you're coming on down. So watch the difference here. Okay, first I'm going to shift forward a lot. So here I am. Remember, I'm still making my pickle jars, everybody. Everything still holds here, but I'm shifting way forward and lowering halfway down. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Right, and then moving through the rest of it. Now I'm going to do it without shifting so far forward, and watch the difference in my wrists. So here I am. Here. Oh, so much nicer. That's so much better. Right, I get, first of all, it's a little easier. I'm not out in front of myself so much. And also I don't have to do some sort of crazy angle. So that's another thing to look at is like, okay, what's going on in my wrists? As teachers, you can be keen and specific about teaching this to your students. So you might be asking yourself, as I did, well, why does everyone shift so far forward anyways? Well, the answer that my teachers told me was because we're preparing for hand balances. You know, crow, those kinds of hand balances, your wrists are like behind your shoulders. So it's super intense. So their logic was that you're preparing for that. I don't know how much that holds up, to be totally honest with you. I'm more of a fan of taking the hands by the chest. So say your wrists are still bugging you. Well, one thing you can do is get a prop called a wedge. And a wedge is usually a cork wedge, which is tall on one side and skinny on the other, and it creates a slope for your hand so that your wrist is never in full flexion. Unfortunately, I don't have one here to show you, but maybe I'll throw a picture in if I can find one online. So the wedges can be helpful if you can't flex all the way, or if it's very hard for you to get the pressure out of the base of your wrist. Because of the gravity, it'll help push more of the weight into the front of your hand and take pressure out of the base of your palm. Now, another thing you could do, and I have a little strap here to demonstrate, is you can elevate the wrist to mimic the action of the wedge. So I could take a strap. This gives me just a little bit of a lift, and I could put this even under my mat. And if I have my hand on it, you can see it creates and mimics the action of the wedge. Sometimes even just a little bit could be helpful. And again, encouraging your hands to get more weight to the front of the palms, right? And decreasing that angle of flexion that is needed. So there you go, everybody. There are some strategies for addressing wrist discomfort in Chaturanga. So just to summarize, the first thing we looked at was position. Are we aligning ourselves optimally? The second thing we looked at was action. Am I falling into the path of least resistance, or can I really recruit the strength of my hands to push more weight into my knuckles and distribute the weight of my body across my whole hand? We also looked at how the actions of the hands can feed into the whole core line of the body through the use of those pickle jars. So we want to get the shoulder girdle and the core working for us rather than just dumping weight down into our arms. Finally, we looked at a couple of suggestions for doing Chaturanga in a way that decreases flexion. And one of those things is just not to shift forward so darn much, but come on down a little bit more straight so your hands are closer to the center line of your chest. And then finally, there are certain props that can help you as well. You can either kind of make your own by making a little bit of a strap pile and putting it underneath your mat or on top of your mat so that your hands have a little slope, or you could invest in a yoga wedge, which does the same thing in one lovely piece. So I hope this has been helpful for you. If you liked it, please subscribe for more tips and to be part of the community. And if you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. If you have other ideas, we'd love to hear them. Please add them in so that we can all benefit from your experience.